Welcome to Nerds at Church, a podcast about nerdery and the Bible. I'm Pastor Emily, and I use pronouns like they, them, theirs.
And I'm Pastor Kay, and my pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Sister Colleen, and my pronouns are she and her.
In this episode, we'll discuss All Saints' Day, which falls on November 1st this year.
Check out the episode description for links to the Bible passages and other references we make in this episode.
So, for our deep dive into saints and sainthood in this episode, we have with us special guest Sister Colleen O'Toole, who is a member of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas, an international community of Roman Catholic women who live in community, vow poverty, chastity, obedience, and service to the poor, sick, and ignorant, and dedicate their lives to spreading the mercy of God. And her current ministry is pastoral work in a parish in Buffalo, New York.
Welcome, Colleen. It's good to have you with us.
It is.
Thank you.
So, becoming a saint, Kay and I are both Lutheran pastors. And becoming a saint in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is actually pretty easy. You just need to be baptized, and then you become simultaneously saint and sinner. But the process in the Catholic Church is much more complex. Can you tell us some about that process?
Yes, I absolutely can. And you're right, it is a bit of a process. I do want to differentiate between we are all saints when we die. All the people in heaven are saints with a small s, but this is the capital S saint of the Catholic Church. So I can kind of go through a couple of the steps with everybody. So the first thing that has to happen is you have to die. If you are a holy person and you die, generally, this is very general because there's so many different exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to wait 5 years for the cause to open. The Pope can waive that, and he has in the past.
Do you know who he's waived it for?
Oh, yeah, like somebody like Mother Teresa.
Ah, okay.
And even John Paul II, when he died, almost immediately his cause for canonization was opened by Pope Benedict the 16th.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. But so generally you wait for 5 years and the bishop of the diocese takes up this cause. It might be the diocese where the person worked or lived or died, and sometimes it varies between person. And so what they do is they kind of gather all of the stuff that they can find, all of the information, if there's any writings or speeches or sermons, anything like that. They write a biography of the person. They also, if it's a relatively recent, they would interview eyewitnesses or family members or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they gather that all together and they send it to Rome. And there is an office in the Vatican that deals with all of these things. It's called the Congregation for the Cause of Saints. And they get a postulator, who is the person who becomes in charge of that one person. And so once that happens, you are allowed to call this person a servant of God. So we have a couple folks that people may or may not know, like Dorothy Day right now is a servant of God, if you're familiar with her. Yes.
Sure. I love Dorothy Day.
I know, right? Yeah. Black Elk is a servant of God, and so is Sister Thea Bauman, if you're familiar with her as well.
I'm not familiar with her.
She is one of my favorites.
Oh.
Yes. So I picked a favorite for each step just in case.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so she's my favorite servant of God right now.
So, I would love to hear a little more about Sister Thea Bauman, but first, the people who progress the cause, possible future saints, and so forth, are they sort of in a similar office to the people who verify miracles?
Yeah, that comes...
Those are Jesuits, right?
No, not all the time. Sometimes, yes, there are Jesuits. And yes, but that comes later. So, like, right now, this is all happening on, like, a local level, if you will.
Okay.
Yes. So then after that happens, and it's sent, they also have to check to make sure there's no, like, because this is a Catholic church, there's no heresies that are associated with this person. And then you are allowed to have kind of local veneration, if you will.
Okay.
So is local veneration like, I know I've been to, particularly in Latin America, a variety of different Catholic churches, and there's like the like alcoves where they'll have usually the Virgin Mary, but sometimes other people. Is that what you mean by veneration? Like those sorts of places where you can pray for intercession?
Well, I mean, yes and no. So it's like, like you couldn't they don't have a feast day. There's no like official recognition yet. It's saying that to the people in that area, this is a person that you know that has lived a good life, and you are able to look to them for an example. and you might have pictures of them up in places.
Sure.
And then next would come the title venerable, actually. So that it's a bit of a misty period sometimes in between here, because when that happens, the congregation is going to go to the Pope next and recommend that this person lived a heroic life, and we mean a virtue.
Sure.
So they have to find like specific examples of living the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, and the cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. So then they declare them venerable. You still don't have a feast day if you're venerable, and you can now have prayer cards made of a person with a prayer for canonization on the back. And that is a sign from the church that this is a person who we are fairly sure is in heaven, and ask them for their help for miracles, which is where the miracles comes in.
Sure.
Yes. So my favorite venerable is actually the founder of my order, Catherine Macaulay, who's a sister of Mercy. She started the Sisters of Mercy. So she's venerable, and it can take quite a bit. My congregation started putting all the stuff together back in the 50s. And so they got all of her letters, all of her writings. They made all of this stuff. They sent it to Rome, and she was declared venerable. It's very bad that I don't know when, but shortly thereafter. And we've since found more things that she'd written. We've done lots of more research, but we can't add to it. So right now it's just she's at the point where we are praying for miracles for her, and we can pray for her canonization. We have little holy cards.
Sure. Oh, cool.
Yeah. So after you're venerable, then that's where the miracles come in that you had asked about. The next step would be blessed. And if you're a martyr, the Pope just says, you're a martyr. You've gone straight to heaven. You are blessed. And you can
So that's like Oscar Romero.
Yes. Oh, yes. Because... No, you didn't. He's absolutely a saint. There is some disagreement on, like, what does it mean to be a martyr? Because the traditional version is, like, you're killed for the faith. Because you're practicing the faith, and people don't like that. And you're killed. And the disagreement was ostensibly that, like, well, he wasn't killed by a non-Catholic or a non-Christian, so was it really a martyrdom? And the Pope basically said, like, yeah, part of the social justice that he was working out of is an essential part of the Catholic faith, and people didn't like it, and they killed him for it. So he is, in fact, a martyr. So yes, that would be him.
Especially because, like, literally they did it while he was presiding at communion.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And, you know, that certainly was like to me, it was a very clear-cut example. But
yeah.
Yes. So he was a martyr, so he got to skip a little bit ahead of the line. If you are not a martyr, you then have to have a miracle. And there's a list of things that are considered miracles. Incorruptibility, which is when a saint's body has not decayed after a long period, which is a thing in the Catholic Church. Some of these are a little bit...
Has that happened, like, at all recently?
I'm not sure who the most... like Saint Bernadette, who, 1800, she is still incorruptible. I'm not sure. Sometimes it's just part of the body. There's like a whole subset of literature that you could get into there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I would have to imagine that the common nature of cremation would get involved there too, but I suppose if God really wanted someone to be incorruptible, then, fire is not going to be an issue. So...
Well, and for a long time, the Catholic Church did not really allow cremation.
Right.
So that's also part of it. I think, though, if you knew that somebody you thought that they were possibly a candidate, you might try to...
avoid the cremation.
Avoid that? I'm
avoid
not sure.
intentionally. Yeah.
Let's not make this more difficult.
Yeah. One of the other things is they call it the odor of sanctity. So you tend to see this a lot in the Middle Ages, that when somebody dies, there's this odor of like roses or flowers around them, something like that, either at the point of death or after they've died.
I definitely thought you said order of sanctity, and I was like, that's right. And I was like, did you say odor or order?
Odor, the smell,
and I was like, it can't be odor, and then it in fact was odor.
Yeah. But the main thing is like miraculous healings.
So not Lazarus. Okay.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
The main thing is the miraculous healing, because it's kind of I don't want to say easy because it's also a process, but it's like the easiest thing to prove, that you have prayed for the intercession of someone. And then if you have a miraculous healing, you're supposed to go through all of the channels, you speak to the right peoples, and there's a team of doctors and scientists and etc. who they just have to prove that there's no natural explanation for this healing, and that it is in fact unexplainable, and so therefore it's a miracle. Then that miracle can be attributed to the person, and then they can become blessed.
So I worked in a hospital as a chaplain, and one time I was helping one of our Catholic chaplains with the sacrament of the sick because the family and the patient spoke Spanish and he didn't. And we were talking about it ahead of time, and just as I was getting to know the process and what they prefer when they're doing sacrament of the sick and stuff. And part of what they said is that it's important to have everybody around. But he also said that the sacrament of the sick does a lot of things. And it used to be called last rites, and a lot of people still call it last rites. But when he was talking about it, he said that yes, he has experienced where someone is miraculously healed. And there's another way that it impacts because it's done in community, and the way that healing is present in community even when the person still dies, or that sort of thing. But so does that mean that when he dies, he could be a saint? Or would he have to, but only if he had reported it to the proper authorities? And
well, the miracle has to happen after someone has died. Yeah, it's very specific. It's very, very specific. So there are saints who have had miracles occur during their lifetime, but those don't count in the way that they would for the canonization process. The Catholic Church loves rules.
Yes. So when I was in college, I was in a choir called St. Elizabeth, named after St. Elizabeth of the Roses from Hungary, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And Hungary. So she had that miracle where the bread that she was carrying turned into roses. It's a long story, but
it's a great story.
And, basically be very careful about who you get married to, I think is the underlying message of that one. But there's several of those, I guess. So yes, so there are several different kinds of miracles that might happen after a person has died. But there are going to also be lesser, popular is not the word I want to use, less common miracles, I guess, that might happen. I once watched an episode of Leverage where, for various reasons, they were trying to fake a miracle. Believe me, the guy in that show was a terrible Catholic. I know enough about being Catholic to know that. And the one that they chose to go for was making a statue cry. And I guess that has actually happened and that's where I learned about that group of people who go around verifying miracles, who I can't remember the name of now, but.
Yes, that, you would often see that a lot with apparitions of Mary. But yes, that could be something as well. Just anything that's non-explainable. And again, the rules, you have to pray for the intercession directly of this saint. And you have to only pray to that, or this blessed, or whatever stage they're at. Because if you're praying to Catherine Macaulay and St. Anthony, who's to say who did it? So you have to be very specific with all of these. And I should note, too, that, in terms of the church, this strict process has really only been around for about 100 years. It has... The first official saint that went through Rome instead of the local bishops, I think, was in the 900s. So there's been some sort of oversight for about 1,000 years, but this specific procedure where there's all of these things, maybe in the last 150 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you know what prompted the shift?
No, but probably trying to centralize power, especially at that time. Yeah. As Christianity is spreading. And I should mention, too, the Pope is allowed to waive any of these things at any point. He does have that authority. So, we just got the news that Pope John the 23rd, who opened the Second Vatican Council, is now up for canonization. He, as far as I'm aware, he does not have any miracles attributed to him, but everybody recognizes him as a holy guy. So,
sure.
Yeah. Vatican II.
Yes.
Was a big deal.
Yes.
I imagine that might actually have something to do with why they waited a little while, but...
Yes, yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah. Yes, and then once you are declared a saint, you can have a feast day, you can have a church named after you, you can get the little prayer cards, you can do all kinds of things, and it's a definite declaration by the church that you are a person who's in heaven, who's lived a life that's worthy of following.
Sure. And at that point, when Catholic people get confirmed, they choose a saint's name, right?
Yes.
So is that the point? You have to be a saint in order for someone to choose your name? Or?
I don't know that there's any rules saying that you can't have a blessed or a venerable.
Okay.
I would have to look. The idea is that it is somebody, Catholic, who's a person who's a good example.
Yeah. That's my middle name is Elizabeth. Because my mom grew up Catholic, was Saint and her saint name was Elizabeth. And
Beautiful. Yeah.
Sure.
so I spent time in Central Europe. So
Wonderful.
Saint
Yeah.
Elizabeth of Hungary is like super my jam. And so where in this process do you become a patron saint of?
Oh, whenever. I mean, that I think is a little harder. I don't know that there's like a specific thing for that. I think it's more like,
once you've been a saint, you're recognized as connected to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
And they're not all patron saints. It's either patron or matron or...
Oh, no, they're all patron.
Oh, okay.
Yes. That's a lovely thought. No, but generally we call them patron saints. So, like, I'm looking, like Saint Josephine Bakhita, who's one of my favorite saints. She's the patron saint of those who have experienced, like, human trafficking because she was sold as an enslaved person. Or you might, if somebody's occupation or something like that, a quality that they had. Saint Rita was in, like, what we would now call an abusive marriage. So she's like the patron saint of women who are in difficult marriages or all these different things. And I think some of that, like Our Lady of Guadalupe is the patron saint of the Americas. And that's a thing that, like, somebody declared. Things like the patron saint of bread bakers.
Lost things.
Yeah, that's probably more of a, like...
unofficial.
Yeah, a popular thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, in 100 years, there could well be a patron saint of podcasting.
Yeah, well, they just, there's a young man, Blessed Carlo Acutis. I'm not actually sure how to say his name, but he was just recently declared blessed, and they are starting to call him the patron saint of the internet, because he was, like, 15. He's very young.
Really?
Yeah,
sure.
And I think he had, like, a website on Eucharistic miracles. I have to look it up, but...
Oh.
Interesting.
So people are like, maybe he's... Because there isn't a patron saint of the internet that I'm aware of. You can kind of...
And goodness knows the internet could use one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yes.
So there are all these steps, and you said that sometimes people skip a few of the steps either because the Pope says so, or because they're martyred, or are there other reasons why people might skip steps?
I don't know of any. I guess unless if you're, like, old enough. If you have squeaked in there before all of this came in, you may have, like, unofficially skipped a step. Because there's plenty of blesseds and venerables that have been just kind of there for a long time that have not furthered their cause. So yeah, I wouldn't. I don't know of any other reasons.
Because people haven't, like, interceded with prayer and received miracle, and so they're just kind of, like, stuck in that blessed venerable stage.
Yeah, possibly, or that just the Pope hasn't declared them yet.
Yeah, when I was in seminary, I learned about Saint Keteri Tekakwitha.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was, like, trying to see if she was the patron saint of anything. And I didn't find anything on Wikipedia, which is, I was trying in the last 30 seconds, so we're not surprised there. But she was the fourth, and I didn't realize this because I had just heard of her as the first Native American to be canonized, but she was actually the fourth Native American to be venerated, and then the first to be canonized.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and now I'm wondering, are there patron saints of those steps? Because I have to imagine that, like, well, okay, so in the Lutheran Church, we've been having this ongoing conversation among the clergy of deacons are wonderful. Deacons do incredibly important work. And there are plenty of people out there who are deacons and just want to be deacons and do not actually want the job of being a pastor or we call it ordained a minister of word and sacrament. They just want to be deacons, and that is the end stop for them, basically, the terminal degree. And so I suppose in the Catholic Church, I mean, it's all of these steps are essentially compliments. It's not like stopping at one of these steps is an insult or anything. These are all wonderful people. And so I suppose there could be people who are called to just remain at one of those steps for either for a long time or possibly forever. We certainly don't know yet. Right?
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes I think we raise up saints that we need in particular times. I was speaking to one of the older sisters in my community, and she remembered the canonization of Saint Martin de Porres, who was a mixed race man living in Peru in the 1500s, I believe. And she remembered when he was canonized in 1962, because she was a young girl back then. And she's like, I've been praying to him since I was born, and like, that's a very specific year. Like, I would not be surprised to find out that the Pope was like, hey, look at what's going on in the world. You know, we need somebody. He is the patron saint of racial injustice and like, what's the word I'm looking for? Injustice, but also like reconciliation.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would not be surprised to find the Pope was like, hey, we need somebody to represent this time in our life. Good old Blessed Martin has been here for a long time. People have been praying to him. He was, you know, I don't know that anyone's documenting anything anymore, but like, this is somebody we should raise up.
Okay, sure, that makes sense.
I think about the Virgen de Guadalupe, right, in Mexico, but has definitely spread, and the recognition of her and the identification of her as indigenous. Whether, like, granted, she also has been identified as mestiza and like in a variety of different ways depending on the people, but that is a particular way also to recognize and to honor the diversity and particular groups within, especially Mexico and Mexican Catholicism, but also globally.
Yes.
Sure. So you've already mentioned a few of your favorite stories and people, but you've expanded on a few of them, but you haven't really told us much about Sister Thea Bowman.
Oh, I just love her. Okay, so she was born in Mississippi, Canton, Mississippi, and she was the granddaughter of enslaved people. She was not born Catholic. She became Catholic because she went to Catholic school and was taught by the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, who are still a group. And at 15, she decided she became Catholic, I think, at 9. She was an only child, and she told her parents she wanted to be Catholic. And then she was 15 or 16 and decided to join the community, who were headquartered in Wisconsin. And she was the first and only Black member at the time. And so, so went from Mississippi to Wisconsin. And by all accounts...
And just having to learn how to put up with snow.
Yeah, there's some writings of her where she's like, you know, she'd never seen it. Mm-hmm. And by all accounts, she was a good sister. She taught English. And then as this was in the 50s, as again, Vatican II was coming and the different civil rights movements, she started to get more involved, and she really became well known for, she has this saying that like, I bring myself, my Black self to the church. Like I'm authentically Black and truly Catholic. That both of those they're not exclusive because a lot of times people can think that they are.
Sure.
And so she recorded an album of spirituals, which is on Spotify, which I love.
Oh, nice.
Great.
Yes. And she did a ton of writing. She actually ended up speaking to the bishops. So she was really well known for like liturgical things and her writing and her speaking on culture and liturgy. And then she got cancer, and then she became also very well known for the way that she lived out her life. And there's they had an interview on like 60 Minutes. And she talked a lot about like faith and healing and strength in the end years of her life, which is also like such a beautiful example.
Yes. I have heard of her now that you started to tell. I didn't know all of her story, but once you started to talk about it, I was like, oh, yes, I have.
Yes, and I would be remiss. She taught at a school called the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University in New Orleans, which is where I'm getting my master's. And they say you have to talk about the Saintly Six, they call them. So there's 6 Black Catholics from America who are all on different phases of the canonization. And they have, which I think is so beautiful and like community-minded, they all have their separate groups, but they're like, nope, we're getting them all in there together. Like, they all need to be recognized. So if you talk about one, you have to talk about the others.
So who are the other 5 then?
Servant of God, Julia Greeley. Servant of God, Henriette DeLille. The Venerable Augustus Tolton, who's the first Black priest, or the first recognized Black priest in the U.S. Venerable Pierre Toussaint, and the Bowman. Oh, and Mother Mary Long. She's venerable as well, I believe. Yes.
Okay, so they're all on the first 2 steps.
Yes. None of them have made it to blessed yet.
Praying for a miracle. Yes. Literally.
Yes.
Yes.
That's fantastic. We've learned a little bit about Thea Bowman, and you said Catherine McCauley is the founder of your order.
Yes.
Right. Is there like any particular things about, I mean, obviously she's important for that reason, but are there any particular things about like her founding the order or like her story that, I don't know, you want to share?
I could go on about her all day because I love her very much. But I think one of the things to note is that like she never planned on starting a religious order. She had this group of women who were doing good work and living together in community. And then the church at the time was like, what is this? We've never had this before. Like, you have to be sisters. Only sisters are allowed to do that. And so she said, like, well, fine then. We'll do it because we believe so wholeheartedly in this institute. Pretty much, yeah. Because they were like, well, sisters are cloistered at the time. That's it. And she's like, that's not what I want. So I'll do that, but you have to allow us to go out into the streets and to go minister to people. And so she had some run-ins.
Oh, so they're the first non-cloistered sisters. Okay.
Well, not like technically, but yeah, yes, at the time and the place. So in Ireland at that point, sure. Yes, they were the ones, they called them the walking nuns back in the day because they would go out and walk around and help people.
That's
and
sure.
Fantastic.
Yes. And so I just love her because she's a little bit of a spitfire, I think.
And I get a certain sense of not fond of bureaucracy, perhaps.
Sometimes, well,
if she didn't want to go through the process of setting up the order,
she loved the church very much, and she loved Catholicism, and she grew up under the penal code, so she didn't have the same experience of being able to like practice her faith freely. So I think that influenced part of it. She very much knew what she wanted, but I think as well said, what is going to work for the Institute? Like when I'm gone, what is going to help it to carry on? And that I respect a lot as well.
Yeah, sure. That's something that I don't think, especially like clergy and religious leaders, I don't think we necessarily ask that question of ourselves enough to say like, okay, like if I'm railroading this thing through because it's the right thing to do, but will it last after I leave? Kind of like, how do you do the lasting change or the lasting impact?
Avoiding the cult of personality.
Yes. Yeah. And by all accounts, all of the things written, she didn't want anyone to call her Reverend Mother, and she just looked like everybody else and didn't wear anything, very much was trying to avoid that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Huh. And then the other two, we have the notes, but I don't know if you actually mentioned Miguel Pro.
I did not, no, but he is, yes, he's a blessed as well. He was a Jesuit who was an underground priest in Mexico, and he was killed. He was martyred by a firing squad. And there's that famous picture of him. There's a picture, but there's the painting, and I think it's Goya, maybe, I don't know, of him being killed. So, but because he's a martyr, we believe that martyrs go directly to heaven.
I don't know who Josephine Bakhita is.
Oh, yes. She's a saint. And I believe she's from the South Sudan, or what is now the South Sudan. She was taken from her family at about 8 years old. Bakhita means lucky one in her native language. Like, we don't really know what her name was. But so she ended up being sold to an Italian family. And then when she got to Italy, found out that slavery was illegal there and sued and emancipated herself.
Nice.
Yes. And ended up like this religious sisters, the Kanashan sisters helped her. And so she became one of them because she was like, that's where I first knew that God loved me. So beautiful. Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Wow.
I like hearing the stories because my mom's side of the family is originally Catholic. I know a fair amount of Catholicism. I know some saints. I took a couple classes at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago when I was in seminary. So I know some, but it's really great to hear more stories and hear about other saints that I haven't heard of. Yeah. Exciting.
It's another kind of nerdery.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and I love them all.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite saint-related story, whether it happened during their life or after? It's really the stories that we non-Catholics are usually fascinated by.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an entrance point for everybody. There's a saint for everything, so it's really good. I do think it's beautiful. Today is the feast day of St. Teresa of Avila, who was a Carmelite mystic and reformer. And she does have this funny little story. And it kind of depends who's telling the story. She was either on a donkey or a horse, or she was walking. And it started raining, and she slipped, or the donkey slipped. She ended up in the mud and the water, and looks up at the sky and says, God, if this is how you treat your friends, is it any wonder you have so few of them?
That's fantastic.
Yes. So a good sense of humor.
Yeah. And so that's today, as in the day we're recording, right?
Yes, I'm sorry. It's October 15th.
Yes. Actually, I think I saw that story on Twitter earlier today, and I'm just now realizing, oh, that's why. Okay. And then are there cases of people who are somewhat unexpected saints? You might get the feeling that the people who knew them, maybe only for one period of their life, would be surprised to see them on the list now?
That's a really good question. I am sure there are. Sometimes you look at the saints from back in the day, some of the popes maybe who were there politically, and you kind of go like, oh, are they a saint because somebody wanted them to be, or because they were holy?
Well, or even if you're a wonderful person, there's still going to be somebody who you just get right up their left nostril. Like that's something about how people work.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how fabulous you are, somebody is going to find you deeply irritating. Yeah. So
there is she's relatively recent, St. Mary MacKillop, and she's the first Australian saint. And she was a sister, and she was actually excommunicated by her bishop for a period of time. Now, stories disagree. Some people say that, he didn't like her because she wouldn't let him take control of the community, and some people say that she had gotten one of his priest friends in trouble because he was abusing children. Somebody else said, it's very, very messy. But so she actually was excommunicated for several years. So excommunication, like a bishop can excommunicate someone in their diocese. It can go further up. But so just in that area, she was excommunicated, and she is now a saint. Yeah, so they actually did canonize her. And, again, she was brought back into the church, or she came back in.
Sure.
And I like that because it's, no matter how bad it gets or how the hierarchy or one person treats you, like that doesn't have any bearing on your actual life. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things that, like, when I was studying liberation theology, right, there were Latin American liberation theologians who would say stuff that kind of the higher-ups in Rome were not happy with, or somebody was not happy with. And the punishment is that they can't talk, and they just have to study more. And I was like, I don't think the studying more is actually going to serve the purpose that you want it to serve in this case. But yeah, so that's like the funny ways that...
Yeah. I think ideally the church punishments are supposed to try and bring you back into communion with the church, and sometimes they don't. But that just reminded me too, like even Pope Francis right now, there were some people that were very unhappy when he was elected Pope because of his past history and what he did and did not do in Argentina. Sure. But like, I think many people would look at him now and how he's spoken about kind of the repentance he sought and the forgiveness that he sought from the people that he's wronged. And you would get a lot of people, I think, who would say like, this is a holy person.
Sure.
Yeah. I remember when he was elected, and I spent a semester in Argentina. So in particular, like, that I was like, okay.
Yeah. And even Oscar Romero too. Like I remember reading at the time, everyone was like, oh, that guy, like they made him bishop. Like, no, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Oscar Romero was made bishop, right? Because, and we actually have, and we'll link in the episode description, we actually did a deep dive into Oscar Romero in April for our, I think it was 5th Sunday of Lent episode, but that was like right around his martyrdom, I think. And he was picked specifically because he would not rock the boat, was not part of the movements of justice and the priests that were doing specifically like direct care and support for the impoverished communities. And then he like had a wake-up call that a lot of us do, and was like, oh, this is actually where God is calling me. And so then people were like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So I know like there are the official ways, and we've talked about them a little bit, of like how like generally Catholics can relate to saints in their spiritual or prayer life. And I'm curious for you, what are the ways that have been meaningful for you in relating to saints, but also, servants of God and the venerables and the blesseds and the saints.
Yes. I kind of all lump them in. Like when I'm teaching the kids, I'm like, this is our saint of the week, who's not actually a saint. Yes. So sometimes I do have some that I like particularly ask for help. So like I do have a picture of Thea Bowman in my classroom because she was such a wonderful teacher. And I will sometimes ask like, okay, Sister Thea, like, please help me to have a really good day with the kids today because I am not feeling it. Mm-hmm. Or, help the kids learn, or different things like that.
Yeah.
So I do have saints that I, that I kind of pray with or ask for help. There's the classics. Everybody prays to St. Anthony when they lose something. Or I have, pictures up on my wall, and they kind of remind me, like I have a picture of St. Josephine Bakhita. And so whenever I see her, I try to like take a minute to pray for those who are being trafficked at the moment now. And then I have part of my prayer life is morning and evening prayer with the sisters. We have like a prayer book. Do you have the Liturgy of the Hours in the Lutheran Church?
There are certain ecumenical orders that do Liturgy of the Hours, and certain like congregations will do it like maybe for Lent or for Advent or something. So we're like familiar. The closest we really get on a systematic, on like any sort of systematic level, is that we do have like a liturgy for morning prayer, a liturgy for evening prayer, and a liturgy for Compline or night prayer.
Yeah. Right. So that is part of the spirituality of the Sisters of Mercy, is praying the Liturgy of the Hours. And we have this prayer book that was actually put together by our sisters. And we have lots of saints. And so, like I said, today is St. Teresa's feast day. So we have a special prayer that we say at the end, written, about her, for the Carmelites, for, contemplative sisters. And one of the things I love about it is it includes saints and blesseds and holy people from all of the countries that we are in.
Oh.
Yes. So I sometimes would be like, I do not know who this person is. I have to go look at them. And it kind of helps keep me connected to our international sisters as well. Mm-hmm. And there are the saints of the patron saints of the order. So the saints that Catherine Macaulay felt a special connection to when she was first starting out. Mm-hmm. And it's like we talk about the communion of saints as like a thing. And I just really love it, because no matter what you're doing or going through, like, you have somebody else you can kind of lean on.
Yeah, sure. That's beautiful. That's the like reminder things and the prompts reminds me of, there's a prayer practice that I have that is called Praying in Color by Sybil It's a book by Sybil Macbeth. I also call it doodle prayers, but you like color your own prayer and you have like a color scheme for it. So you just have like 3 or 4 colors, but you do this prayer and it can kind of become an icon, and then you place it somewhere that is fairly visible. And so if you're doing it for the week or even just for the day, you have it somewhere that's fairly visible. And so then every time you walk by or you notice it, or you notice like one of those colors somewhere else in your daily life, it prompts you to remember the prayers that you were holding together with God. So I like that, like, oh yeah, or I don't know this person, I'm going to go learn about them. And then like what's happening now in that country, like to keep those connections. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And as a person with ADHD, I find those visual cues to be very helpful. When I start my year with confirmation students, I like to encourage them to, keep all of your confirmation materials in one place, in a visible spot in your home, so that you'll be able to remember to bring them with you on Wednesdays. But also, when you see them as you're just wandering through your house during the day, every week before they go home, they tell me who is one person or one group of people who you're going to pray for this week. And so I encourage them that when they see their confirmation materials in their house, they can say, oh yes, and I'm praying for that person, and then say a brief prayer for them and move on.
Yes.
That's awesome.
And hopefully that's getting prayer into their daily life a little more.
Yeah. And Lutheran confirmation would be kind of the equivalent to catechism, just in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
I believe.
I was like, I don't know if you know that or not. I don't know if our listeners know that about catechism or confirmation. But...
Middle schoolers. Yep, essentially.
Now we'll dive into our readings for All Saints' Day. And our first reading is Isaiah chapter 25, verses 6 through 9. Isaiah tells of a vision of God setting a feast for all peoples and banishing pain, sorrow, and death from the earth. So one of the themes that I noticed in this passage is the idea of waiting with hope, which resonates really a lot with kind of how you were describing the process of canonization, right? This waiting with hope and an active waiting. And the thing that it reminded me of, I just moved, and so I've been unpacking books that some of which have been in boxes for years now because I've just moved around so much and had storage. And so now I have like this episode and another episode that we're recording. I have just like all new references instead of my usual go-to. But there's a book that I read a couple years ago when I was doing my chaplaincy residency at the hospital, and one part of that was working on the kidney floor, and we had kidney donations and transplants on that floor. But the book's called The Arrival of Someday, and the main character has some disease, and I don't remember exactly the disease, that the family knows about from a young age, but like manifests itself when she's like in her late high school. And so she's on this wait list for a transplant, and it's this whole time she is waiting and trying to figure out what it means to wait with hope and what it means to have hope in this space of who knows if a transplant will come in time. And you get higher up on the list, the more critical it is, but the more critical it is, the less time you have until you get the transplant. But it was just this like this kind of this idea in Isaiah of this feast and stuff, but we're still waiting for it. We're still waiting with hope for this day that will come and that God will bring. So that was just like the thing that stuck out to me for that.
Sure.
Yeah. And then in verse 6, I don't know. So verse 6 says, "On this mountain, the God of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-matured wines, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-matured wines strained clear." And I don't know if other people have seen this. It's been going around Facebook a little bit the last couple of weeks. There's this like, it's not a meme, it's like a Tumblr post or something, of that the Lord of the Rings is actually a Hobbit memoir. Like it's written as a Hobbit memoir, right? Because
yes,
the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings like are written supposedly from Bilbo and Frodo's like as their memoirs.
Sure.
And that's why there's like such elaborate descriptions of all of the food and the feasts and stuff that they have. So I was like, this verse gives a hint at like this whole thing, and if a Hobbit were writing this verse would be at least a chapter long.
Absolutely. And then in verse 8 we read, "The Lord God will wipe away the tears from all faces." So in a lot of 18th and 19th century European literature, a sign, particularly of a male character, sometimes also for a woman, I'll get into why in just a minute, being a caring and practical person, was that they would always have an extra clean handkerchief on hand. Now, during that time period, a man's handkerchief was usually large, practical, could absorb a fair amount of, necessary bodily fluids, whatever. And ladies' handkerchiefs tended to, like some women also carried large practical ones, but ladies would also need their lacy, delicate handkerchiefs that were more for show for various occasions. And so women were slightly less likely to be carrying around the extra large practical handkerchief. But basically, carrying an extra one that was clean was a sign of thinking of others and anticipating practical needs. And when I think of literature of this time, one of the characters that comes to mind as the type of person who would absolutely always have an extra clean handkerchief on hand would be Colonel Brandon from Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, as played by Alan Rickman in the Emma Thompson version of the movie. But, of course, God is the ultimate and unlimited handkerchief source and is clearly happy to share. So...
God of all handkerchiefs.
Absolutely. You never know when someone might need them. Of course, in these days of the pandemic, I should point out that as helpful as handkerchiefs can be in some cases, they are not quite as
sanitary,
hygienic as were originally thought, and disposable tissues are probably a better bet. But you can still carry those around, too.
Mm-hmm. Or you can carry your own handkerchiefs and just wash them a lot.
Yeah.
But... So, Sister Colleen, is there a patron saint of handkerchiefs?
Well, I think probably, I don't know handkerchiefs, but I think there's probably a patron saint of lace making.
Oh, yes, I'm sure there is.
I have to look.
Because goodness knows that was actually a major way that people, supported themselves, especially women, for a lot of years.
Yes.
I mean, even now, although these days people aren't really willing to pay for the handmade kind.
So... Actually, I just Googled patron saint of handkerchiefs.
Yes.
And this is just like Google and Wikipedia, and I don't know where I'm going to find actual, patronage. Okay. Patronage is what it would be in the Wikipedia article, right? So, yes. Saint Gerard Mahia. I should figure out where he's from to know.
Magella?
Naples. Is Naples in Italy? Okay, I don't know
yes.
Italian pronunciation. We'll go Magella. And he is the patron saint of children, childbirth, mothers, motherhood, falsely accused people, good confessions, and lay brothers. Why did you come up as the patron saint of handkerchiefs then? Oh, the patron saint of mothers. So one miracle in particular explains how Majella became known as the special patron of mothers. A few months before his death, he visited the Pirofalo family and accidentally dropped his handkerchief. And one of the Pirofalo girls spotted the handkerchief moments after he had left the house. She ran after Gerard to return it. Keep it, he said to her. You may need it someday. Mm. And then years later, she was on the verge of dying in childbirth, and she remembered the words of the saintly lay brother, and she asked for the handkerchief to be brought to her, and almost immediately the pain disappeared, and she gave birth to a healthy child.
Wow.
Very nice.
So I'll include a link to that in our episode description.
Sure.
The other thought I had was maybe Saint Veronica, but...
Oh, that would make sense.
I guess you could call that a handkerchief.
For patron saint of lace making?
No, I'm sorry. I was thinking handkerchief. I think
no, the shroud.
Oh, the shroud.
Veronica with the
I was like, I don't know who Veronica is. Gotcha. I hear Veronica, and I'm most likely to think of the Archie
Betty and
the Archie comics.
Veronica, who art the face of Jesus, Veronica.
Yeah,
that's a more accurate option. Yeah. Did you have any other thoughts, Colleen, for Isaiah?
I don't have any connections to like books or media or anything, but the very first Lutheran service that I ever went to, the homily was on God's extravagant abundance. And this was also the first time I'd seen a woman priest. I was very excited. And she taught, it was the loaves and the fishes, and she talked about how Jesus had, not only was there enough, but there was extras, there was leftovers. And that was reminding me of that. It's not just a feast of rich food. It's also got really good wine, and, it's top of the line. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Jesus does not skimp out on the snacks. Yeah. Absolutely.
God is about all the snacks. Mm-hmm. Plenty of food.
Our second reading for this episode is from Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 6a. The author of Revelation casts a vision of the God of all time, dwelling completely with humanity, having removed death, pain, and sorrow. And I do just want to throw in a note here. I had a fun moment the other week with my confirmation students when I asked them, what is the name of the last book of the Bible? And somebody immediately piped up with, Revelations. And I said, nope, try again. And they immediately started going backwards in the table of contents because they thought that was the problem. And I said, no, you were closer earlier. And finally, I managed to point out Revelation, singular.
It is
not
one
plural.
big one, not lots of
yes.
small ones.
So I'm still, teaching confirmation students to deal with my pet peeve.
I was going to make a PSA about that, so I'm glad that you got it first. It is not a big deal. And if you want to be like extra cool, according to super nerdy pastors, Revelation, not Revelation.
Right. Well, my point is that I really get irritated by people who think that they know more about the Bible than me and then can't quote the last book of the Bible correctly when it's the most printed book in the history of the world and has a table of contents right there in front. So if you're going to get holier than thou about quoting your Bible, please make sure you know the names of the books. I don't think that's a lot to ask.
Yes. Speaking of Revelation.
Yes.
One of the themes that I noticed for this passage was the idea of newness, right? It's a new heaven and a new earth, a new opportunity, new space. And I was thinking about it, and as I usually do, I go to my young adult dystopias that I love, and thinking about the spaces of newness that happen in those books. And in both Hunger Games and Divergent, there is a sense of, there's a point before the end where it seems like there will be like a new thing, but it's really like a revamped old thing. And then in Hunger Games, the way that Katniss gets around that is by assassinating the person who would be taking over to do the old thing in a new way. And then in Divergent, there's like a whole thing with memories getting wiped and all of that stuff. But this space of...
And we are not condoning either wiping memories or assassination in this podcast.
No, we are not.
Just to be clear.
We are not. And we're also not saying that, like, actually Earth is going to be, like, blown up and destroyed and there will be this new planet called Earth. That is not what we're saying. But the, like,
Right.
newness that God brings, right, is bigger than any of that. It's a newness that says, nope, we're overhauling all of the systems that are perpetuating injustice. We're overhauling all of the systems that are causing harm for this new thing that's going to really and truly be new, not just kind of a makeover of the old thing.
Yeah. And in verse 2, we read, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So I don't know how I hadn't really had this thought before, but this time when I read it, I was asking myself, so is the architecture of the New Jerusalem determined by, like, the residents? Like, would Martin Luther live in a house that was the German Tudor style from the 1500s, whereas Leonardo da Vinci would have something much more Italian, probably? Or maybe after you've been wandering New Jerusalem for a while, and you find a new style that you actually like because you realize, oh, I guess I always thought the houses around me were kind of ugly, but, now I see this house and this looks really nice. And it happens to be from, 600 years after I was alive, so no wonder I didn't know about it. So I'd like my house to look like this instead. Or, like, is there just one perfect style of architecture that the whole city is that style? Because, if anyone can do architecture well, I suppose it must be God. So I kind of wonder about that. But if it is that whole, the residents determine the architectures of their mansion, as it were. In that case, how do you get that many different kind of architecture to actually sort of work together and look like a cohesive whole in a giant city like that? Like that, because otherwise it would just look so incredibly chaotic.
Maybe that is.
So
maybe it is in fact the chaos that makes it come together.
Yeah.
Also, my grandfather was a builder, and he built the house that my grandparents lived in.
Mm-hmm.
But also did one of his jobs in his lifetime was building miniature scale model mansions of, like, actual mansions in Cheshire, Connecticut, where they lived. And so when he died, I actually don't know if it was when he died, but when my grandmother died after him, we read the John passage about many dwelling places. And so I think this connects for me of, like, well, probably he would have built his own, like, house in New Jerusalem for my grandmother and him, right, and right, my uncle. But I think there's a way for chaos to feel connected. It's like I think in Mexico and a lot of Latin American countries, like, there's such vibrant colors that the houses are painted, and it works. It works together. Right. There are all these different colors and they work together.
Yeah. Well, and I was also kind of thinking about how in The Good Place, even though that place isn't actually heaven, in the way that we would think of it, they have all those different house styles because the people are so different that they need their own type of dwelling places. And the trick for that place seemed to be that they had them all fairly far apart. So there was space so that you could see the one style that the person was going for. So I suppose that's another option too.
Yeah, that would make sense. Mm-hmm. In verse 3, I was reading verse 3, and it says, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'See, the home of God is among mortals. God will dwell with them, and they will be their peoples. And God's own self will be with them.'" And it reminded me of the story "Don't Pass Me By" Eric Gansworth. It's in a short story collection called Fresh Ink, and it's for the main character is a kid who's Native American and is just starting school. Like, the reservation school goes up to, I think, 5th grade, and then this is the next year. And the kids from the reservation have to navigate, like, how Indian to be off the reservation. And so, like, do they try to blend towards white? Do they try to blend towards black? Which is, of course, as we know, a false binary. But this idea of, like, navigating that, and yet they are a people, right? They are their own people. And so when we think about, like, the connections that they have, and not wanting to, like, inscribe Christianity on them, but, like, to say, like, God's own people, you will be my own people, but, like, to carve out this space to say, like, no, you get to be your own people. You don't have to be white or black, and to recognize that it's, like, infinitely more complicated than that in real life. But
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts, Colleen?
Well, I did think of The Good Place too, about the different houses. But I was also thinking, my grandmother used to tell me that she thought heaven was going to be like Yankee Stadium because she loved the Yankees. She would always say, like, I don't think I'm going to be behind home plate, but I don't think I'll be in the bleachers either.
That's fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah.
I just love that the home of God is among mortals. That's beautiful.
Yeah. There's this like sacredness that I think gets erased so frequently when we're like, no, it's a new thing. It's an out there. God's, and it's so easy to like distance ourselves from God when the reality is throughout the Bible, God is like, no, I'm going to come camp with you. I'm going to pitch my tent right here. I'm going to, like, you see this ladder going up and down? I'm going to be right here next to this rock that you're laying on, Jacob. You know, like, slightly creepy, but also comforting.
One of those things that only God gets to say, because if anyone else says it, it sounds very weird. Yeah.
Yes. And then our gospel for this episode is John chapter 11, verses 32 through 44. Jesus joins in Mary's weeping and then calls Lazarus to come out from death. So this is part of a larger story of Lazarus' death and then Jesus bringing Lazarus back from the dead. One of the themes in this is the idea of compassion or empathy, right? This is the famous, like, shortest verse of the Bible. Jesus wept. But also there's this like sense of Jesus like full body coming into this compassion and empathy that he has for Mary in her weeping. But there's also like Mary is in the midst of sitting Shiva and so the Judeans who are with her are following her lead. So she gets up and goes somewhere, they get up and follow.
Right.
And it's, I mean, in today's time, there is a distinct lack of compassion and empathy on like kind of large scales, but I also think about the ways that we develop it. And one of the primary ways that we develop compassion and empathy is in literature. And I think that's where this push for more diverse protagonists in particular is so important, because there are little white boys who have only ever had little white boys be the protagonists, so they haven't had to develop the compassion and empathy or read or understand a story from somebody else's perspective, whereas those of us who are not cishet white boys have had to do that. And so books like Fresh Ink, which I mentioned earlier, and Out Now are two examples of great collections of short stories by a variety of different young adult authors, where the Out Now is specifically around queerness and Fresh Ink is specifically around cultural diversity, though they both have both in them. But it gives like such fuller pictures of humanity, and especially of youth and young adults, and like what they can be up to and what they can struggle with in their lives, and to open up that space for empathy and compassion, which I think is also like, I don't know, seems also like one of the things that saints do. Like when you were talking about, oh, I don't know who that saint is, or I don't know who, and so then it creates the bridge to connection and the bridge to learning more and knowing more. I don't know if that's how you experience it, Colleen, but
no, absolutely, I think so. And when you were mentioning Our Lady of Guadalupe, like, we consider Mary a saint, although sometimes we don't put her in the same category as others, but just making me think, like, when she appears to people, she almost always is she comes to them in their language, in their culture.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And, like, for a lot of people, like, Our Lady of Guadalupe might be the only, like, vaguely Hispanic thing they know. And I have to be like, well, like, if that's all they can do, or that's the only part they can come at, if that's their point of entry, like, that's good. But for me, it's like, yes, this is God being with us, specifically saying, like, I'm speaking to you in your language, dressed like you know, in your place, and sometimes in opposition to the I'm putting quotes up, the hierarchy of the day, or of the time and the place, right. You know.
Yep. Yeah. The God coming to be with us.
Yeah.
And meeting us where we're at.
Mm-hmm. And simultaneously making everything so much more complicated.
Yes.
As God is wont.
Frequent. Yep.
Yes.
And in verse 32, in this passage, we read, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Okay, so for anyone even vaguely familiar with the story of Jesus and Lazarus and Lazarus' sisters, you know that this moment is an incredibly serious emotional moment in a incredibly serious emotional arc of this story. And I'm sorry, but I'm here to ruin it a little bit today. Because ultimately speaking, when you think of this in larger scale, it sounds super impractical. Like like she's saying this out of grief, right? If this was actually true, if wherever Jesus went, people didn't die, that in the long run would not work out well. So either you've
kind
got
of puts
Jesus
a hamper on
only
the
saves,
crucifixion.
well, yeah, or it would have happened a heck of a lot earlier. Like, I mean, think about it. You're in a village. People live, people die, life is normal. And then this guy comes wandering through, and while he's there, everyone who is on the brink of death hangs on.
Ooh.
And then as soon as he leaves, they all die. Or, most of them die. And a couple of them still hang on, but, you can tell that while he's there, no one dies. Don't you go hunt that guy down and drag him back, right? Or
get really mad that your loved one is stuck suffering, and then all of a sudden all of the people that do the burial stuff are overwhelmed when he leaves.
Right. Or
So
I mean, Jesus does actually go heal people who want to be healed. So maybe he does that. But then, your sister, say, happens to break her leg 3 days after he leaves, and he's not there to heal her anymore. And wouldn't you get kind of frustrated by that? Or are we talking about a version of this where Jesus only saves his favorite people? Because that doesn't sound a lot like Jesus to me. Like, Lazarus is clearly one of his favorites. They're old friends. That's fine. But, I don't know that Jesus would only save certain people. And goodness knows, speaking of ways to get yourself crucified pretty fast, oh my goodness. Making it known that you can save people's lives, but you're not always going to do it. So, how has no one broken Jesus's legs and forced him to stay in their village? I mean, people used to do that with blacksmiths, right? Or I don't think that Jesus is just saving Lazarus because they're old buddies. So this story actually presents a question of how did this, practically speaking, work during Jesus's lifetime while he was here? Because if this story got around, how did people not immediately go and find him with 50 of their closest friends and insist that he come and raise someone else who was dead?
I mean,
when these
I think
stories
the
get around,
answer to that is because also immediately when this story got around, people started plotting to kill him.
Yes, well, exactly. So
Probably
practically speaking, though, it does kind of raise the question of how did this actually work? And it reminded me of another short story collection called The Worthing Saga by Orson Scott Card, who is far from a perfect human being, but did have some really interesting fantasy and sci-fi ideas. And it has a story that considers what actually happens when you do try to save everyone from suffering and how very weird that can get.
Yeah, overpopulation real fast.
Well, not so much overpopulation in that case, just the magnificent levels of lacking life experience that you wind up with when you wind up chopping out that much of everyone's life.
Ooh,
you wind up becoming a very different kind of people if you really haven't experienced suffering, or you don't even know anyone who knows suffering, that kind of thing. Because this was the stage of not only was he saving everyone from being injured or healing injuries, but he was also when someone died of old age, he would have everyone immediately bury them and then forget that they had just died and make them think that they had been dead for a year already, so that they would be saved from the immediate grief. And so that was a whole nother level of lack of life experience.
Yeah, particularly poignant because today is All Saints Day, and this episode is for All Saints Day, and this year, as last year, there's just so much grief. I know I'm part of a professional queer clergy group, and I'm one of the chaplains for the group, and we're doing actually an All Saints service for the members of the group because around grief, and not just the grief of death in the sense of 4.55 million people globally have died of COVID at this point, over that. But also like the grief of the loss of community and the distancing of community that we've had in the pandemic, and the grief of illnesses that have been exacerbated, or mental illness that has happened because of the lack of community, like all of those things that we need our grief. Like, how do you live with, like, grief is an expression of love. How do you have All Saints Day without grief?
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. And then in verse 43, we read that when Jesus had said this prayer, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" As most people in my life know, I love this one as a queer person, right? The calling to come out of the closet, which is complicated, and like, no disrespect to those of you who are not out, but I just love this particular passage. And I've been in a couple of Facebook conversations lately that have kind of centered on this too, but in the story, It's Not Like It's a Secret by Misa Sugiura. It's a young adult queer romance kind of book. The main character comes out pretty easily. Like, the phrase, "it's not like it's a secret," like, she's not hiding it or anything. But the dynamics around it, actually, like, the more complicated and messy stuff happens after she comes out. And part of that is just multicultural relationships, and like being an Asian American in a relationship with a Latina, and like the dynamics of their friendship groups, and like all of the other stuff that goes into that. But it's just this like beautiful thing of like, yeah, Lazarus comes out. That's the easy part. After that is the like plot, the people plotting to kill Jesus, and the figuring out how to live after death, and all of that stuff.
Like the line from Hamilton, dying is easy, living is harder.
Yeah. Do you have any insights, Colleen, that you wanted to share, and John?
I know, I was thinking about that too. Like, what happens to Lazarus? What do you do? Like, is there a grief with that as well? What do he and Mary and Martha do afterwards? And is that why Mary and Martha remain? I actually don't know. The thing is always that the women stay at the cross. Is that why? Mm-hmm. Because they saw this happen?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing too, it says here that the people say to Jesus, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus says that to the people at the beginning of John. And so, like, there's those couple texts where it's like, did Jesus just learn something? What's the one with, like, is it the Syrophoenician women?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm always like, yeah. I run this little Bible study for these wonderful little old ladies, and they're always like, how much did Jesus know? And I'm like, we don't know. And I tell them all the time. They always ask questions, and I'm like, we don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's one of those things. Like, what did he learn? Was it that empathy that he was learning more from them? I don't know, but
yeah,
I have to imagine that the experience of being next to people while being a person who are going through grief, and being next to people while being, just God as usual before that or after, being next to people experiencing grief, like being a person had to change how Jesus experienced other people's grief. I can't imagine that wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah. There's a song, and it's got some poetry in it, and it talks about Jesus as the infinite squashed down into finite.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's called the Christ Hymn, and it's Alana Lewandowski, it's something like that, and it has these like beautiful little spoken word pieces. And that's actually kind of what I was thinking of too. Like, Jesus knows that that Lazarus has died, but it takes him a while. Like, what's going on? I just have questions.
Yeah. Where is that space? And where is, because Jesus also weeps, right? Like,
right.
He needs that space for grief. And I think about that. And just a quick note for our listeners, we'll try and find a recording of the Christ Hymn. I'll do some Googling, but we'll try and find
There's
that.
There's a lot of songs called the Christ Hymn, but we'll work on it.
We'll try and find it.
Yeah. To
include it. But I do think, like, I talk to people about grief, and I've said this already, right? That grief is love. Grief is an expression of love. And that part of grief and part of the like death, whether it's a physical death or a metaphorical death, that comes with grief is that we're having to figure out how to relate to a person or a situation in a new way. And so, like, even though Jesus knows Lazarus is coming back, there's still this place where Jesus has to Jesus and Mary and Martha and everyone have to and will have to figure out how to relate to Lazarus in a new way, because even when he comes back, he will be a different person for having died. And so, like, whether it's relating to someone because now we relate to them in our memories and our remembering and our pictures of time with them, or when it's they're back but in a different way, or like those sorts of things, that space of grief, Jesus needs that space to grieve the change and the shift from how Jesus and Lazarus used to relate to how they will relate in the future. Which also connects with if we want to think about Lazarus as the beloved disciple later in the Gospel of John, which is, there are many theories of who the beloved disciple are, but one of them is that it's Lazarus. And so then that brings into a whole new, like, what is that new relationship that they get to have, that they can have because of that? Yeah.
So, Colleen, any other thoughts on life, the universe, and everything?
Well, one of the things, there's a really beautiful collection, if, like you said, the stories, right, about the saints. Mm-hmm. It's called Blessed Among Us, and it's a book by Robert Ellsberg, and it has 2 saints for every day, and one of them is kind of the more quote-unquote traditional saint, you know, a person who has been canonized. But then they also have people who are not canonized yet, people who might not even be Catholic, but just who can be witnesses for us. And so they do have a series of videos as well. But it's a really beautiful book that I would recommend to anyone who wants to learn more.
Nice. Thanks for joining us, Sister Colleen, and thanks for joining us, you all, our listeners. Catch us next time when we'll discuss nerdery connections to the scripture readings for the 24th Sunday after Pentecost. This podcast has been produced by us, Emily Ewing and Kay Roloff. For more fun, check us out on Twitter and Facebook at NERDSATCHURCH, Nerds at Church, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our full guest episodes and interviews, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. We hope Patreon can help us get our episodes transcribed for those who need or prefer that. Though if you want to help us with transcripts, let us know via email or social media. As the ancient Christians said, Pax Vobiscum.